Notre Dame just made a big move by hiring former NFL executive Mike Martin to be the next general manager. What makes him the right fit, and how will he impact the program? Plus, Micah Shrewsberry called out Notre Dame fans after the loss to Louisville on Sunday night, but maybe he should direct some of that frustration inward. We're breaking it all down on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome in to another edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and I am thrilled to have you here on Wednesday, February 19th, and thanks for making this your first listen of the day. This is a reminder to please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast, and we have got a lot to talk about on today's show. Unfortunately, we are going to have to dive into the abysmal state of Notre Dame men's basketball after Micah Shrewsberry basically had a meltdown during his post-game press conference after the Irish lost to Louisville by 15 points at home on Sunday night. But we're going to save that for the end because I want to start with something positive. Notre Dame, the football team at least, has found its new general manager, the former director of scouting advancement for the Detroit Lions, Mike Martin. We're going to discuss how Notre Dame is shifting its approach to roster building and why hiring Martin as a general manager is a major step forward. But first, let's start with what Martin brings to the table for Notre Dame. Personally, I think this is a strong hire for Notre Dame's general manager position. And does that mean it's guaranteed to work out? Absolutely not. And am I going to pretend like I knew who Martin was a couple weeks ago? Nope. But that's how it works with a lot of these guys who work in front office roles. They exist somewhat in the shadows, but their work is vital to the success of any organization, and Martin is no different. It's kind of like the James Blanchard situation. I didn't know his name before he became a target for the position, and I assume that was the case for a lot of you as well. But then, as I learned more about him, I liked him for the role. Ultimately, it didn't work out. That is absolutely no bearing on whether or not Martin will be successful at Notre Dame, and I think he will be. So over the past several days, I've tried to learn as much as I possibly can about Martin and what his responsibilities are going to be at Notre Dame, and here's what I found out. The main thing that jumps out to me, and pretty much everyone who looks at Mike Martin's profile, is that he brings decades, that's plural, decades of NFL experience to the table. He has spent 20 years in NFL front offices with the Lions, Panthers, Texans, and Buccaneers. He has spent the last 4 seasons with the Detroit Lions as the team's director of scouting advancement, and he has worked with the college and pro personnel staff to enhance scouting and roster building processes. And I think that's very important for a couple reasons. Not only does he have experience scouting NFL players, he also scouted college players, and he has been involved with the construction of the roster, and those are 2 things that are going to be very important for his next job at Notre Dame. His time with the Lions also coincides with their evolution from being perpetually one of the worst teams in the NFL to one of the very best. As a Cleveland Browns fan, I can't even imagine what it'd be like to watch the Browns do what the Lions have been doing because they got it out of the mud. They finished 3-13-1 in Martin's first season in the Lions front office. Then they improved to 9-8 in 2022, 12-5 in 2023, and 15-2 this past season. Now, in the postseason, it didn't really work out for them. And was he solely responsible for their success? Nope, but I believe he played a key part in it, and he was around some of the best in the business every single day. So he has seen what it takes to get to that level every single day for the past 4 years. And his extensive scouting background predates his time with the Lions. He knows how to evaluate talent at the highest level. He worked as an area scout for the Carolina Panthers from 2018 through 2020, and he spent 11 seasons with the Houston Texans prior to that, climbing all the way to the assistant director of college scouting. Keyword, college scouting. And I've seen it get brought up that scouting NFL players is different than scouting college players, and I think that's true and a fair concern. But even though he's been with the NFL for basically his entire career, he has spent a ton of that time scouting college players. And from a personality standpoint, I think Mike Martin fits at a place like Notre Dame. And let's be honest, just because you're great at your job does not mean that you are going to work at a place like Notre Dame. It's different. Part of the reason why we love Notre Dame is because it's different, but sometimes it prevents people from succeeding at that institution, even if they would be good anywhere else. You have to be the right fit at Notre Dame, and you have to be good at your job. I think Mike Martin is both of those things. Martin played football for Vanderbilt from 1999 through 2002, which is certainly a like-minded academic institution compared to Notre Dame, and he was a finalist for SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year as a player. So he understands the importance of succeeding on the field and in the classroom, which is certainly not the case for all of the top programs in college football, but certainly is at Notre Dame. And he also worked with Notre Dame's current director of scouting, Matt Jensen, when they were both with the Houston Texans. And that connection is extremely important because these two are going to be working closely together in this new role. Marcus Freeman has called Matt Jensen his secret weapon. So the fact that Jensen and Mike Martin have experience working together is important because this is somewhat against the grain for Marcus Freeman. Most of the people that he has hired, he has had some prior connection with. As far as I know, he does not have any connection with Mike Martin, and the only connection that Martin has with anyone on the staff at Notre Dame is Matt Jensen. So it's important that these two guys who are going to be working together all the time know each other and have worked together before. I would assume that Jensen had high praise for him considering that Notre Dame went out there and hired Mike Martin. But we also know that Mike Martin wasn't Marcus Freeman's first choice. That was James Blanchard. It was a very public display. All that is true. But this is still someone that he prioritized early on. And even when he was looking at James Blanchard to be the general manager, he isn't just hiring a general manager. He's basically restructuring his personnel department after Chad Bowden left to take the job at USC. He also brought Zaire Turner with him, the director of player personnel, as well as one other member as well. So Marcus Freeman is looking at his entire personnel department and basically restructuring it with a new vision. And even though we all agree that Martin wasn't his first choice, still one of the top people that he looked at. And according to John Bryce from Football Scoop, Martin and his wife spent a few days on campus last week, and they met with athletic director Pete Bavacqua, the school's top NIL official, the current members of the recruiting staff, and then Martin finished with a 3-hour plus meeting with Marcus Freeman. And after all that, after talking to all those people, going around the campus, going around the Goog, Notre Dame was prepared to offer him a multi-year deal worth more than $500,000 annually. Martin did not take long to accept that offer. Now, it has not been made official by the school yet, but this is a done deal. And unlike Blanchard, Martin wants to be at Notre Dame. He wants to work for Marcus Freeman. There was no haggling over the responsibilities and the autonomy that he would have with the roster. And I believe that makes him better as a fit compared to James Blanchard. Blanchard is excellent. I'm not trying to do some revisionist history here and say, oh, Al, actually, just because James Blanchard turned Notre Dame down, he was not the right guy. No, he might have been excellent at Notre Dame, but he might not have because maybe he wasn't as good of a fit. I think Mike Martin is a great fit, and he brings a ton of experience, which makes him great for this role. But as we break down his impact on the program, it is important to point out that the responsibilities of the general manager could vary from program to program in this current state of college football. Even though teams are moving more towards an NFL model, the role of the general manager can be a bit vague, and it's not like the NFL, in which the responsibilities of the general manager are pretty uniform across the board. But what we do know is that Martin brings an NFL approach to roster building, which should help Notre Dame compete in modern college football. He also has connections and credibility with both college and pro scouting circles. So I think that Martin is going to help Freeman build out the personnel department with more NFL people, and that's what Marcus Freeman wants. He wants a structured NFL-style personnel department, and he believes Martin is the right guy to implement it, and that is why he went out and hired him. So we know that Martin's NFL experience makes him a strong hire. But this move is about more than just one guy. Marcus Freeman is rethinking how he builds his entire personnel department and his roster, and Martin is just the start. More on that right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who is matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed. all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service, real-time updates only, and iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So now that Notre Dame has hired Mike Martin to be the general manager, I believe it signals a shift toward an NFL-style approach to roster management. This isn't a big surprise. There certainly have been signs that Notre Dame has been trending in this direction. It is something that we have talked about before on this show, and I think it's part of the reason why they chose not to match Chad Bowden's offer from USC. It's important to remember that Bowden came up as a high school recruiting guy. He worked for Freeman when he became the defensive coordinator, and then once Marcus Freeman became the head coach, he promoted Bowden to become the recruiting coordinator for the program, and then he got promoted to general manager only after Michigan tried to poach him last year. And as I've said before, I believe that Chad Bowden is excellent at evaluating and recruiting high school prospects. But I was less certain that he was a great general manager in an NFL-style system, and that's where Notre Dame and a lot of other top teams are heading. The professionalism of college athletics has been going on for a long time now, especially college football. It's been going on for the past several years since the introduction of NIL in the transfer portal. Do I love all of it? Not really, but that's irrelevant, right? And I think my concerns with the professionalization of college football has more to do with like the playoff system and the way that college football is trending more towards an NFL-style playoff system, and I don't really like that. It kind of devalues the regular season. I knew that playoff expansion was coming, but I don't love that it's going to 14 or potentially even 16 teams, but that's besides the point, right? From a roster and a structure standpoint, I think that there are plenty of great reasons to model it after the NFL. And I think that's going to be amplified even more once revenue sharing is passed, which we expect that to happen at the beginning of April. And that's going to be the closest thing we have seen to an NFL-style salary cap in the NIL era. And in this new era, programs that operate with an NFL-style personnel model are going to have an edge in recruiting, talent evaluation, and roster construction. Traditionally, college programs had to rely heavily on their own coaching staffs to handle recruiting, and they would get some support from analysts and recruiting coordinators, sure, and, maybe some under-the-table payments as well. The NIL before there was NIL, boosters giving envelopes full of cash to recruits, free cars, all of that good stuff. Notre Dame had been behind in the personnel department for a long time. It's something that Brian Kelly talked about. It even goes all the way back to when Charlie Weiss was the coach. Like these other SEC programs, yes, there was probably some under-the-table stuff going on, but they also had way more personnel staffers, assistants, scouts, analysts, all that stuff. Notre Dame just did not have that many people on the staff. And their previous structure leaned more on the coaching staff and fewer on personnel specialists because they just did not have that many to go around. And that made it even harder to compete with the elite programs on top of all the stuff that they've been dealing with for decades, like the location, the weather, the lack of a great social scene, the fact that they have to go to class and they have to pass their classes. Also, the fact that athletes have to live in dorms. Like you've heard all of this stuff before. And on the point about the dorms, I do remember when I was a student in Dillon Hall sleeping in a lofted bed. It was like an extra long twin. I'm not a very big guy, like 5'9", 170. And I would think about the fact that I was cramped in that loft. And I would think about, imagine being like the 6'5", 320-pound lineman trying to sleep in this bed. And imagine that lineman going on a recruiting visit and thinking, I got to sleep there. It's not as big of an issue now because all these guys can live off campus through NIL, even if they have technically a dorm on campus. But those have been issues forever. And Notre Dame had even more problems because they just didn't have the resources in the recruiting department to make up for that. But now, with an NFL-style system and with Martin leading an NFL-style personnel department, I think he's going to take on more of the talent evaluation and roster management responsibilities, which should, in theory, free up Marcus Freeman and his staff to focus on coaching, developing, and recruiting to some extent as well, because college coaches are always going to be involved in high school recruiting, but they aren't going to have to, worry about the NIL. They're going to have to worry less about the roster retention and all that stuff. And Martin is going to be able to assist with high school recruiting, but it goes beyond that. Like a GM in college football isn't just going to be recruiting high school talent. They have to manage the entire roster building process, which does include high school prospects, but also the transfer portal, NIL considerations, and retaining the roster. In college football, since the dawn of its existence, really, has been a talent acquisition business, but the business has changed. It's not just about securing as much talent as you possibly can anymore. It's about retaining players and knowing when to supplement them through the transfer portal. And Mike Martin's experience in the NFL, particularly as a scout, means he understands how to evaluate talent, not just for the immediate impact, but for long-term development as well. And I think as Notre Dame continues to evolve its talent evaluation process, I think they're going to take on a more sophisticated approach because of Martin's extensive background. It's not going to be just about him either. He's going to hire other people to support him on his staff. And I think this is going to help Notre Dame prevent some of those mistakes, whether it be in recruiting or the transfer portal, because they have someone leading the charge who has done it before at the highest level. We have seen Notre Dame miss at the high school level, that we've seen them miss a little bit at the transfer portal, but overall, they've been really good. And you look at what this coaching staff had been able to do, like they took a team to the national championship, and they had not recruited a top 5 class in a really long time. That's been rare in college football. That almost felt like a prerequisite for the longest time. Now, Notre Dame probably needs to get a top 5 class in order to get over the hump in college football. But the fact that this coaching staff has already proven that they are great at developing, and now you add in a guy like Mike Martin, who's a great evaluator, and an NFL style where some of that burden is taken off the coaching staff and they can focus even more on development, I think that's a great thing for all parties. Because one of the biggest challenges of any college coaching today is, they tell you all the time, the schedule never stops. They have to balance their own roster, recruiting, management, coaching, all of that stuff. When they have a more efficient system in place, that should alleviate some of those issues. And it's going to be hard for college coaches. Like, it's never going to get easy, and hiring Mike Martin doesn't make all that other stuff go away. But I do think it's a significant step in the right directions. And another thing, too, is this is kind of a dark aspect of the new college football that is a little bit different when you hire an outsider like Mike Martin. When Chad Bowden was the GM, he knew all the high school guys. He knew all the players on the roster because he was such an important part of their recruitment at Notre Dame. Martin is going to be a part of the recruitment, but it's going to be more involved with the evaluation. Like, Martin is not going to be a guy who's going to be dressed up as a leprechaun in the South Bend airport who gets kicked out and he's leading all the recruiting visits. That's not really going to be his job. Like, he's going to have some relationships with these guys, but not that intense, because he is going to be the guy who has to make very tough decisions about guys on the roster. Like, hey, we thought this guy would turn out to be one type of player. Turns out he's not. Probably time to move on from him so we can go get player X, right? That's a lot tougher to do when you are the one who is building those relationships and maintaining those relationships. It's kind of like Billy Beane in the movie Moneyball, and in real life, obviously, because Billy Beane is a real person and Moneyball was based on a true story. But in the movie Moneyball, Beane did not have any relationships with the players. He didn't even watch the games. He wanted the most objective viewpoint humanly possible. There's certainly cons to that, but there's also plenty of benefits. And I don't think Martin is going to be that extreme, but he is going to have to lean a little bit on that side, as is any good general manager going forward, because they are going to be tasked with making very difficult decisions about the roster, bringing guys in and, unfortunately, letting guys go. That's how it is in the NFL. Cut day, if you've seen Hard Knocks, you know how brutal that is, and that is now going to be a part of college football. And I think that by giving Marcus Freeman a personnel leader that he can trust, it helps alleviate some of that for Marcus Freeman as well. And as I've said before, we do not know for certain that Mike Martin is going to work out at Notre Dame, but we do know that Notre Dame is embracing a modern, professionalized approach to roster building, and I believe that is the right way to go about it in this new era of college football. And normally, Notre Dame has been pretty resistant to change and keeping up with the times, but now they are making a shift that ensures they don't fall behind in the rapidly changing landscape of college football. But while Notre Dame football is making the right moves to stay competitive, Notre Dame men's basketball is going backwards. Micah Shrewsberry called out fan support after the loss to Louisville on Sunday night. But is that really the issue? That's coming up next on Locked On Irish. So if you have not been paying attention to Notre Dame men's basketball lately, I don't really blame you, because there hasn't been a whole lot of good stuff to talk about. But I did have men's basketball beat writer Tom Noy from the South Bend Tribune on the show on Friday of last week, and we really did a deep dive into the program, everything that's been going wrong for them this season, why it's been pretty disappointing. And I thought that maybe, the season could finish strong. They had a good opportunity playing a good team in Louisville at home. Maybe they get a win, they build some momentum as they close out the year, and then they go into year 3 of the Micah Shrewsberry era with some level of optimism, right? But it started with that game against Louisville on Sunday night. That did not happen. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even close. They lost by 15 points at home in front of the opposite of a raucous crowd. But the performance was not anywhere near as ugly as Shrewsberry's press conference after the fact. And to be fair, it was an entertaining first half of the game, but then in the second half, the wheels came off, Louisville dominated them, and Micah Shrewsberry was visibly frustrated. He starts off, says he doesn't have anything to say right after the game, opens the floor up for questions, gets a question, and then Jack Sobel from Blue and Gold asks a question, a very fair question, about what has gone wrong for this team in recent games, because a couple weeks ago, they were 10-10. Now, they are 11-14. For whatever reason, that question triggered a response from Micah Shrewsberry that really nobody saw coming. He went on a nearly 3-minute rant where he was all over the place, but he called out the fans specifically for giving up on the team and all kinds of other stuff. Like, he said the word "me" a lot, and at one point it felt like he was trying to fall on the sword and blame himself, but he also said that it was an embarrassing turnout from the fans because he said that he saw more Louisville fans there than Notre Dame fans, and he said don't give up on the players, give up. Like, he talked about people calling for him to get fired. It was just weird. And then it ended with him literally punching the microphone, and then he just stormed off. And I think a lot of people were surprised. Now, Micah Shrewsberry is no stranger to outbursts in the postgame press conference. Last year, he went off on his team after a very bad loss, but then the team rattled off a winning streak right after that. So it felt like he was igniting his team. He was trying to get his team fired up after suffering an embarrassing loss. But this does not feel like that at all. This feels like a coach who's kind of lost control of his program. And for the record, I want to come out and say I loved the hire of Micah Shrewsberry. When I first started doing the Locked On podcast, it was February of 2023. Did not have a whole lot to talk about back then, but Mike Bray had announced his decision to resign after the season, and the Micah Shrewsberry hire was happening. So I was talking a lot about the future of Notre Dame men's basketball, and I haven't talked about it as much lately because the football team is, they just went on their run in the college football playoff, and there just hasn't been a whole lot of good stuff to talk about with the men's basketball program. But I was very open about the fact that I love the hire of Micah Shrewsberry. I knew that it was going to take some time. I said they wouldn't make the tournament for about year 3 into that era. But now I'm having some legitimate concerns. I'm not saying I jumped off the bandwagon, but this is probably the worst it's been. Because even though they were really bad last year, they at least tried. Like, the team was scrappy, they fought hard, they played great defense, and they were in a lot of games that they probably should not have been in. And it feels like this year, it's the complete opposite. On paper, they have a little bit more talent, and their defense is not anywhere near what it was last season. But more than anything, it's their effort and their lack of just movement on offense. It doesn't seem like the players care, and in turn, the fans don't care. That's a real simple motto for life. If you don't care about this, then I'm probably not going to care. That's how fan dynamic works. For a great example, let's look at the NBA and NHL and how they handled their All-Star games, or All-Star weekends, I should say. So the NHL created the Four Nations tournament, and I'm not going to lie, I had no idea what it was a couple weeks ago, but then there I was on, what day was it? Sunday? No, Saturday. It was Saturday night, and you got USA, Canada. Fights break out immediately. The crowd's going crazy. And then the game was electric. I'm not even a hockey guy, but I was enthralled by that game. And it was a meaningless game on paper, but you could tell that the players really, really cared. There's history between the USA and the Canadian men's hockey teams. Obviously, it goes back years and years and years. But even though it was just basically an exhibition, the players cared and the fans loved it. It was awesome to watch. I cannot wait to watch the rematch between these two teams in the final of the Four Nations Championship on Thursday night. Meanwhile, the NBA just had their All-Star weekend, and their players cannot be bothered with trying literally anything remotely competitive during the All-Star weekend, and in turn, the fans don't care. The ratings are down for the All-Star weekend, and no one really cares. And I think that right now, or at least as of late, Notre Dame players have not shown enough to suggest that they care, and the fans don't care either. When they're going 11-14, they're losing 4 or 5. When they're just struggling to do anything positive in ACC play, the fans don't want to see it. And this has been going on. I wouldn't say that the Notre Dame basketball fan base has always been great. They haven't always been supportive. Even when Mike Brey had it going at different points, it wasn't like they were selling out games. But the blame is not on the fans. It's on Micah Shrewsberry to put a competitive team on the court. Not a team that's 13th in the ACC. Not a team that's regressing. And they're also, this all happens on the heels of a loss to a Louisville team who was literally at rock bottom last year during the end of the Kenny Payne era. It was as bad as it could get. Notre Dame went to Louisville and smoked them. Then they hired Pat Kelsey from the College of Charleston, and they have turned it around completely in 1 year. Now, it is different because Louisville is certainly a basketball school. They invest more money in the NIL, academic restrictions. It's all different. But you want proof that Notre Dame fans can care about basketball? Look at the women's game on Monday night. The Notre Dame women's basketball team smoked Duke on Monday night. They're undefeated in the ACC. They're the number 1 team in the entire country. That place was packed. It was sold out. Marcus Freeman was in attendance. He was loving it. The women's team is a lot of fun to watch, and they are good, and they care a lot. And guess what? The fans go out there and support them. So when the men's team can't hold their own, it shouldn't be a surprise that they aren't supporting them either. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't support them at all, but I'm saying that as the coach, you cannot blame the fans for not supporting and showing up on a Sunday night when, by the way, there was a winter weather warning in South Bend when this team just hasn't really shown that much effort lately. So Notre Dame men's basketball has been a tough watch this season, and I don't think fans are going to permanently, be disinterested in the men's basketball team. There is a way out of this, right? Micah Shrewsberry can get his team to come together here, finish the season somewhat strong, but he really needs to focus on just getting his teams ready to play hard for 40 minutes before worrying about the crowd size, and he should be focusing his frustrations inward and on his team and why he has not been able to right the ship in year 2 and play a brand of basketball that is exciting to watch. And that was a big reason why Notre Dame went out and hired him, because he has this free-flowing offense. They're going to shoot threes. They're going to be fun. They're going to be scrappy. They're going to be playing hard defense. And that is just not what we are seeing with the Notre Dame men's basketball program. And I think it hit a low point. I wouldn't say it's rock bottom on Sunday night, but this is certainly a low point in the Micah Shrewsberry era. And I'm not jumping off the bandwagon yet. I'm not. I still have some hope that Shrewsberry can turn this thing around. He's got a great recruiting class coming in. Like, maybe he can get this turned around in year 3. They're a bubble team. They make the NCAA tournament. At that point, all the momentum is going to be back in the Micah Shrewsberry era. But this is the most concerned I've been about the state of Notre Dame men's basketball in a long time. Unfortunately, we have to end the show on a pretty sour note, but that is going to do it for me today. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Tomorrow, we're going to be right back here. We're going to talk some football recruiting, and then on Friday, I'm going to be answering your questions with another mailbag episode. So if you've got a question you want to be featured on the show, send them my way. You could submit yours in the YouTube comments, or you could send them in on social media. The X account is @LockedOnIrish. Instagram is @LockedOnIrishPod. You can slide in the DMs there with your questions. Also, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. That way you never miss an episode as we continue to do it daily here throughout the off season. If you enjoyed the show today, please like the video below if you're watching on YouTube, or rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review on your preferred platform. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. I'll see you on Thursday.